Hello everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome back to Tekpon. Today, our guest is Peter, the CEO and co-founder of Mozart Data. Hello.
Great to be here.
Please tell us what your company does.
Sure, we're Mozart Data. We're the easiest way for teams to spin up a modern data stack. So what that means in practice is without any data engineering, teams can get started on world-class data infrastructure and really focus their energies and efforts in deriving insights from their data as opposed to worrying about how to data engineer.
What is the biggest problem that you're solving for companies?
Well, the biggest problem is that data engineers are very expensive to hire, and a lot of the work that they do is very rote, is very solved at a greater scale. So moving data from SaaS tools or databases into a central warehouse is very much a solved problem and shouldn't be the wheel shouldn't be recreated by every single team.
Okay. And what are your best features?
Well, our best features are basically the ability to move that data, to move it very reliably, and as schemas change, maybe upstream, we're able to sort of fix that on the fly and have a very reliable flow of data from your tools into a central warehouse.
Okay. And I saw you have a lot of integrations. Maybe you can tell us your best integrations or your most used integrations.
Well, they're all the best, but of course I'm a little bit biased. But I would say a couple of things. Most of the data that people move are from their production system, so you don't actually want to be querying your production system. Instead, you want to be querying data and joining data together in a data warehouse. And so most of what we do, it's going to sound lame, is move data from one database to another database. It's like, well, what's the point of that? Well, the point is basically to have it in a powerful columnar that you can basically start combining data. So one of the best features of Mozart or of data analysis period is like a sort of 1 + 1 = 3. So when you're using one data source, it's very easy to maybe sum or count it. But actually the real power is when you start to be able to segment from data from a different data source, right? So maybe I want to know how my paid customers are using my application, or how my free customers are using my application, or how my customers who are based in Switzerland are using my application versus Japan are using my application. So often that data resides in different places. To do the really powerful segmentation that's going to help you do your ads optimization, that's going to help you basically assess which features in your product are working versus not. And again, when I worked at Microsoft, we had this term 1 + 1 = 3, but nowhere is it more true than in the data world, where you're able to get not just the value from one source, but from multiple sources. It sort of increases exponentially how much value you get out of your data.
That's great. And what is the pricing for your product?
So we don't reinvent the wheel. We have a variety of packages that basically start from trials or free all the way up to folks that spend 6+ figures with us annually. So it really depends on the usage. Where we sort of shine is that we really craft packages together, bundles together of both rows that you import and compute that you use to do analysis, and we sort of bundle that together in a really compelling way. Also have really easy to understand packages for early stage companies, and then hopefully they grow with us. But our pricing for the most part is just usage based, and the way that people use data is that they basically bring rows to their warehouse, and then they also sort of do compute over those rows.
Okay. And you have a lot of use cases, so maybe tell us the top three.
So I hit on some of them, which are largely downstream of us. So we're sort of the engine under the hood that enables a lot of really data savvy folks to be really powerful within the organization. So rather than them being gated by needing a data engineering team to get started, many can just get started instantly using Mozart. So the folks that the powerful punchlines don't really come from from Mozart Data, but rather from the really data smart, data savvy folks downstream of Mozart. Now, the types of analyses that they do, and I mentioned a few of them being like ads optimization, product sort of features, what's working, what's being used, what isn't. A lot of the times, these are basic dashboards that really evolve into ad hoc analysis use cases where somebody is really trying to understand a particular segment, and that's going to drive a key product decision or drive a key business investment decision. A lot of times people want to know which elements of their marketing is working, which parts of their sales funnel are maybe distorted. So all of these things are the sort of starting points of analysis, but it typically starts with basic time series of revenue. And one of my favorites that we use at Mozart, unsurprisingly at Mozart Data, we're huge consumers of our product. Actually, per capita, I think we might be one of the highest consumers of our product, or if not the highest. We're a 25-person company, so we're not explicitly the highest consumer of our product, but per capita we might be. And one of the ones that I love using is just sort of the ability to reconcile the invoices that go out with the payments received. So it sounds like a very basic question, which is, what's my ARR, what are my invoices, and what are my payments received? And ideally, the ARR divided by 12 should equal the invoices and the payments received. Not always, because maybe you're billing annually, but some sort of transformation of that should all be true. These should be three lines that basically go right over top of one another. And when they don't, it tells you a couple things. Maybe you're not sending out the right invoice. Maybe you don't have the right ARR, or maybe someone's not paying you and you need to reach out and say, hey, you missed the bill. So I think that is a very, 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 very basic use case of analytics. And it's incredibly powerful. It helps me. I'm not going to say it helps me sleep at night, but it's one of the things that helps me sleep at night.
Thank you so much for sharing this. Yeah, you explained it superb. And are you the first company to solve this problem?
We're certainly not the first. So this solution has been around for my entire career. So at least 2 decades for me, and certainly it dates back probably 50 plus years. What our solution is pretty unique or novel at is the specific sort of modern tools that it's combining. So certainly not the first to create the modern data stack. So many of the components of Mozart, which include Snowflake and Fivetran, are really sort of the pioneers of the modern data stack. But essentially, data stacks have been around for forever. Not sort of forever in sort of modern computing, but also for my entire career. In fact, it was the sort of repeated nature of building data stacks at all these different companies that I went to, and the time and the cost and the need to hire that basically made it very apparent to me that if I were to go to another company, my first 3 months might be spent spinning up the data stack that I thought was appropriate for the company. And instead, you can do this in under 30 minutes with us.
Okay. So that's how you innovate.
I think it's always sort of tough to pat yourself on the back and say, what's your innovation? I think that there have been a number of all-in-one players that have evolved over time. So today, the modern data stack looks like, I sort of describe it as a venture capital slide with 862 logos. And you're supposed to navigate those logos in a very savvy way, and we think that's the wrong approach. Instead, we think that the easiest way to get on board the right stack for many, if not most, companies is to just hop on board with Mozart Data. And we've done good negotiations on behalf of our customers, and 2, we've picked out the type of tooling that's going to be very powerful and scale with the organization, and is going to be the one that basically best enables your expensive data analysts or biz ops or sales ops, marketing ops, or data scientists, or even data engineers to really move quickly.
Okay. And when did you start the company?
we started the company actually right at the start of the pandemic. So Dan and I started the company in April of 2020. So
Okay.
what's very interesting is that Dan and I, for the first year of the company, never saw each other in person.
Wow.
So Dan and I have been friends for 25 years, and we live 7 miles apart. So it's a remote first company, but what's crazy is that very often when you think about kind of two founders, or I guess a classic would be like Larry and Sergey in a tight garage in Palo Alto or something like that. But this wasn't exactly us. We were literally operating the entire time, via meetings and Zooms, and it was a very different founding a company experience. So we started almost 3 years ago. So 2.5 years ago, I tend to round down, and then shortly after we did the summer Y Combinator program, and then after that we really took the company in a big direction.
How was YC? Can you tell us more about your experience?
So we were actually the first virtual YC batch.
Wow.
And
Nice.
and I had a great experience with YC. I actually still talk to my YC partners, I thought one of the best shortcuts to starting a company. Dan is a multi-time founder, in fact, a multi-time YC founder, but I was a first-time founder, though I had been in the startup ecosystem for decades. One of the best cheat codes is to, have your company, 3 months later, be sort of a real sort of viable company. And that was a big part due to YC. I think the biggest sort of thing that I missed out of YC was the ability to interact with so many of my classmates. We've actually done some sort of reunions post, and I've been actually pretty involved in the YC community around the Bay Area of San Francisco for, basically since graduating. And, now that in-person events have started to come back, it's nice to see kind of that community thriving.
Super happy for you. And I guess the idea came from your past experiences.
Yeah, so sadly, this was not some sort of light bulb moment of brilliance. This was like 20 years of sort of both Dan and myself working in different parts of the data stack, but effectively figuring out that, combined, we were like peanut butter and jelly and able to really build off of Dan's strengths, which tend to be backend and data engineering, and my own strengths, which tend to be data analytics. And the company was effectively the thing that we have built and would be building. In fact, it was effectively me and Dan in a box. So there was no sort of interesting moment of aha. There was no sort of very sort of cliched like eureka. Instead, it was really what would we be building? And I think that sort of trivializes it a little bit. So many of the details are critically important. So I think the way that Dan thinks about doing development, Dan, who's our CTO, but also really the product visionary, the way that he thinks about doing development is to test ideas and then get a lot of customer feedback and iteration. And some of the early versions of the product weren't really versions of the product. They were really me and Dan, and there would be an interface. Someone would make a command, and that would actually cue Dan to do something in the background. So so I think what we were trying to learn was what is it that people just to go with a YC cliche, make something people want. And we found out what people wanted in their data infrastructure to get started.
That's a great story. And you recently raised the Series A, right?
That was actually last year. So so it feels like a little while ago, just because every startup month is like a year. But it was in 2022.
And are you planning to raise this year again?
Actually, no plans to raise in the short run, certainly not in 2023. Hopefully we can do a little bit better than making our investors' money last for 18 months. So I think one of the lessons of the past few years has been be smart about your capital. So in the world of capital is free and the interest rate is zero, and there's so many firms competing to get into deals. I think you can develop a lot of bad habits. We've tried to, steer a little bit clear of the worst of those habits, but we are trying to build a venture scale company. So we are trying to, take the opportunity that we see in the market. So that certainly doesn't involve raising this year, at least we hope, and then obviously trying to continue sort of our aggressive growth path.
And what is your vision for the future?
So the vision actually is not too different than the existing product. It's only to augment the value proposition. It's to shrink the time to value. So what we want to do is be the sort of no-brainer choice for early stage companies that are trying to get their data infrastructure. So they're, maybe they've got a greenfield situation, or maybe they're querying Postgres database or just their production system, and we want this to be a no-brainer. In the same way that you'd want to set up any system very early on, even maybe before you might think you need it. We want this to be that option for most companies. So the vision is to really just shrink the time to value. So in order to get value out of any data infrastructure, including Mozart today, what you need to do typically is connect a bunch of sources, understand that data, clean it, and clean it some more, and then a little bit more,
Yeah.
and then essentially display your first dashboard, your first typically time series, bar chart, whatever it is. There are verticalized solutions where you put in your credentials and then out pops a bunch of bar charts. So those solutions tend to have almost no time to value, right? Just literally just needs credentials. So our goal is to essentially evolve into something pretty similar where the time to value is very short, but the flexibility of the system is very high. So I think one of the reasons why we didn't just replicate the verticalized solution is that so much of data analysis is being very very tight about cleaning your data and understanding what rows and columns need to be excluded from your analysis, in order for it to be effective.
And what has been your biggest challenge since starting the company?
I think the biggest challenge tends to be really getting a team together. So, Dan and I knew that we wanted to work with one another, but where we really struggled was finding the set of engineering and GTM go-to-market talent that we thought would really have the same passion for I'll just say it, vanilla B2B SaaS data analytics work. So stuff that is I think very, very boring to most people.
Yeah. What has been your best growth tactic for gaining new customers?
The best growth tactic has largely been honestly putting ourselves out there. So doing podcasts and being very active in the YCombinator community and the message boards there, and really doing things that don't scale. So being very very active in terms of being willing to help and being willing to do sort of consulting work that basically isn't really ultimately part of the product, but in turn we learn so much about what people want.
And I'd love to hear a story. You said you have over 20 years of experience, so please tell us a summary of that.
Sure. So, my story is pretty cliched for the data world. So I would say a couple of things. I'm a failed academic, so I did a PhD in behavioral economics and empirical economics. So really getting to work with giant data sets. At the time, those were, millions of rows, which today is almost an afterthought or a joke of a large data set. Mozart itself moves billions of rows or updates billions of rows each month. So sort of the work that I did during my dissertation at the time I considered huge data, but in practice was very, very small. And then after sort of transitioning from academia, I really realized that I wanted to stay in the Bay Area, and that often meant getting a job in tech. So what I did was I got a job in, bouncing around startups where they figured out sort of a use case for data and sort of the interplay of data and economics. And for me, that started actually in video games. So I went, and Dan actually also started his career, as well as our first employee, John. And another employee, John, who all kind of worked in video games. And video games are a great sort of environment for rapid iteration, for learnings, for very difficult learnings, because most video games fail. Most of the games that I worked on failed massively, and it was in that sort of experience that I learned you sort of really get a much more stark picture of what works and what doesn't. And then from there, I actually transitioned to B2B companies, and I've worked sort of at mostly late stage startups where they had a bunch of data. They just didn't have a lot of the tools for maybe diving deep into that data and extracting a lot of value from it. So I often built teams to do that effectively.
And what's your best piece of advice for founders?
So I think there's different pieces of advice for different life stages, and so many of these pieces of advice are stolen from YC. So I'll say some that are cliched and some that are not so cliched. So let's start with some of the cliche advice is talk to customers and make things people want. So it is sort of Paul Graham's sort of canonical pieces of advice. And I think the biggest piece of advice is don't lie to yourself. So I think some of the challenge for our company was, us fooling ourselves into trying to, fit square pegs into round holes by finding, people that would show a modicum of interest, but would need a lot of the sort of edge case work just to make data analysis effective to them. And that was us lying to ourselves about having some sort of product market fit with that type of company. Yeah. And as a result, we wasted a lot of cycles on it. The other piece of advice, typically comes around fundraising, which is, I think that when, somebody is very interested in your idea and is potentially interested in funding you, that person is not interested. They have to be over the top interested to be truly interested. And one of the things that YC does incredibly well is it sets this artificial fake, I'm saying it on a podcast, but you didn't hear it from me, but this sort of fake and artificial deadline called Demo Day. And Demo Day is in part to demo your product to a big audience, but it's also there to create this sort of arbitrary deadline. And a lot of what that does and the power that it gives you is it says, well, I really wanted to close my round before Demo Day, or I really wanted to close my round a month after Demo Day, or 3 months after Demo Day. And that's just sort of like a fake deadline that the founder can create in their head. And but that deadline is really powerful because it signals who's in and who's out, and that in and of itself, sort of the limited amount of time, the less time you can spend raising money effectively, the more time you can spend on your company. For our company, we lost a third of the team. So it was myself, my co-founder, and our first employee at the time of YC, and I effectively became an ineffective, I might still be ineffective, but at the time I was an explicitly ineffective member of the team while we were fundraising. So losing a third of the team is incredibly expensive in terms of affecting the growth of the company.
Thank you for sharing this. I hope it will help a lot, and I'm sure it will help a lot. And I have one last question. What's your favorite software?
What's my favorite software?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, I'm going to be biased and go backwards in time and talk about, my own career. So, I spent a big chunk of my career at a company called Yammer. Sort of enterprise social networking software has always had a warm spot internally. Today we use Slack, and I think that there's a number of really great stories about the growth of Slack. But I would be remiss if I didn't sort of talk about Mozart customers that we use that we really love. So. I would say that we're Rippling customers, so I really do love that I don't have to be an HR expert, that I can be a CEO, and very, 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 very part time in the HR world. So I never sort of signed up to be an entrepreneur slash HR manager, another one that. Another piece of software, that maybe that we use a lot, I'd say big fans of. Well, of course, there's a lot of data analytics tooling that people use after Mozart that includes BI and reverse ETL, and then turning your data into data products. So all of those sort of tools I'm typically a big user of, and unsurprisingly, we're huge consumers of data at Mozart Data.
Of course, yeah. Is there anything else that you want to tell us today on the podcast?
Obviously, if you're ever interested in learning more about data, asking a data question, whether or not that involves Mozart data infrastructure or not, or just getting started on that journey with just a few clicks in under half an hour, obviously would love for you to either visit mozartdata.com or ping me, peter@mozartdata.com, and I'd be happy to sort of dive in. And really, I get a lot of enjoyment. I mentioned that at the start that my career started as an academic, meaning I wanted to be a teacher, and I have a real passion for teaching data and deriving data insights. There's something really special for me about seeing a company where their eyes light up and they start connecting the dots. And and I really hope to see that scale with Mozart Data.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to meet you.